Welcome to the Soft Tissue Therapy Podcast, an informative resource produced by soft tissue therapists for soft tissue therapists. In the show, we discuss the latest research studies surrounding soft tissue therapy, personal success stories, and collaborative reflective practice, as well as interviews with a variety of guests and many other useful nuggets of information for you to take away and apply in your practice.
So I'm pleased to welcome onto the Soft Tissue Therapy Podcast, Jo. Welcome, Jo.
Hi Liam.
So Jo is a long-standing client and friend of mine, and I'll let her introduce herself. But she has been suffering from long COVID, and she's on the path to recovery now, finally. But it's going to be a great chance to have a chat with her. We can hopefully, as soft tissue therapists and manual therapists, we can not only learn the effective techniques and things that have helped her in terms of manual therapy, but also just to gain a broader understanding of this strange version of chronic fatigue that manifests in all sorts of different ways, and advice that we can then give to our clients of ways that could help them. So Jo, I wonder if you can just tell us a bit about what life was like before long COVID, just so we can get an idea of what you were up to, activity levels and lifestyle.
Yeah, so before I got long COVID in April 2020, I was just a kind of normal mum of three. I've got three girls who are two 18-year-olds and a 13-year-old. I did some work, some HR consulting. I did lots of fitness. So I was probably running twice a week. I was walking a lot. I was going to the gym, just active, normal mum, basically. Enjoying life, thinking, just taking it for granted, really. And then things changed.
So when did things change?
Yeah, so in, I think it was about 2 weeks after we went into lockdown, my daughter came home. I was kind of enjoying lockdown. It was great because I was going out on bike rides and I was, enjoying seeing Oxford with hardly any cars. And it was just such a nice experience. And then Holly came back with COVID. And actually, a few of my friends had it and they were totally fine. They were either asymptomatic or they just kind of had low-level cold, couple of days and were fine. So I was really relaxed about it. And Holly got it and I almost sort of stood next to her, kind of saying, give it to me, so I could get it over and done with and then just go out and enjoy life. Little did I know. So I think it was about 2 weeks after she got it, I started to come down with COVID symptoms.
And then, so what happened after that? Did you make a recovery? Was there a gap, as there tends to be with people that suffer from long COVID, where they're fine, they seem to recover, and then the onset of symptoms comes a few weeks after, or was it immediate?
Yeah, no. So COVID for me, the sort of first week wasn't terrible, but wasn't particularly enjoyable. I had problems with breathing. I had quite a lot of pain on my chest. And I had a fever. I had sort of lots of different symptoms. My heart was feeling a bit strange. So it felt like it was sort of going through my body. It was nothing like I'd ever experienced before. So I knew that it was COVID because it was so odd. I mean, it was just so strange and it just felt quite scary. But then after about 10 days, I sort of felt like I was getting better. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I can start, exercising now and start walking. I knew I couldn't exercise, but I could definitely do low-level walking. And so after about 10 days, I started to do that and was, trying to meet friends and doing a 2-mile walk and then coming back and feeling utterly terrible and having to go to bed. And so I knew then that something wasn't right, that it wasn't a normal recovery like you'd have from, I don't know, you had a bad cold or something. And I'd say really for about the first 6 weeks, I kept trying to do that and kept crashing, but low-level crashing, but still my body wasn't recovering. And then it was my 50th birthday and everyone was getting really excited and trying to put things on for me and surprising me. And I think the whole, just having that emotional kind of exhilaration was just way too much for my body. And actually, on the evening of my 50th birthday, I just completely crashed. I mean, like way worse than COVID. And so I was basically massive pain in my chest. I had a fever again. I just ached all over. I just felt utterly terrible. I felt like I was going to die, to be honest. I just never felt that unwell before. So then I was really in bed for just months, it felt like.
So day-to-day life then, at that stage, I mean, what did it look like? Obviously, you were in bed for large portions of the day, but did you attempt to get back up? Or, how draining was that day-to-day?
Yeah, I'm very stubborn, so I was always very keen to get better as quick as possible. So I just found the whole thing very strange that every time I did get up, I felt very shaky and I had no energy in my legs, and my brain, I just had terrible brain fog, so I couldn't even thread the needle for my daughter. It was it was just everywhere. I just felt everything was affected. So I kind of tried different things. But nothing really worked, and so I talked to doctors. I went to hospital twice, and they just ran all the tests. Everything was fine. So I came away from that thinking, okay, everything's fine. There's nothing really bad happening to me. So clearly I can get better. And so I just kept doing what I was doing before. I kept trying to get better, walking, and then crashing. And I did this for about a year, just thinking I'll just try and do a bit more, but then I just kept crashing. And I think that was about the time I met you, Liam. That's when you came into my life, which was really about 4 or 5 months into the long COVID episode.
Yeah, I think it was about August. So puts it about 4 months, I think. Yeah, so that's when I can start to put my slant on it, because I came in, I didn't really know you that well before. I knew Jeff, your husband, but obviously this had put a huge strain on the family. You were suffering physically, and it was a really difficult time. And actually, fast forward to now, I've seen you intermittently, maybe once every 1, 2, or even 3 weeks. So the progress to me is quite marked and quite obvious. But you've had to live with this day to day to day. So it's been a real tough old slog. But when I first came in, we understood very, very little about long COVID then. We understand only slightly more about it now. There are even question marks around, was this an actual thing at that stage? Nobody really understood, did they? So I came in with the kind of basic understanding that I've got in terms of other chronic fatigue conditions like chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia, those kinds of things. And the one thing that I do know about those conditions is that no one person has the same experience as the next. So it's very difficult to treat and to come up with a formula and a way to approach it. So when I first met you, I know that a lot of our sessions were just basic, relaxing, very, very light touch massage sessions, weren't they? And the aim, from my perspective, the objective of the sessions was to just calm down your nervous system, which I think is always a good idea.
Yeah. And what was I like when you first saw me? Because I don't really remember that. It was very hazy.
Even though I didn't know you very well before, I could tell that you were putting on a brave smiley face. And I could probably guess that you were going to be absolutely wiped out after the session, just from the social interaction to try and put on a good front. You were, in terms of responsiveness to the treatments, we couldn't go very deep at all, and there was a lot of apprehension there from you as well. So I had to really pay attention to that and go really, really lightly. And one of the initial markers before we even start to think about any kind of rehabilitative exercise or increasing the load on your nervous system, one of the markers that we used from session to session was depth of touch, basically. How deep were we going with the massage? And we were trying to just increase the load on those tissues week on week, just to expose that nervous system to some passive load. So rather than you going out and even walking up the stairs or going for a long walk, we were trying to expose those tissues to some stress, but just enough to adapt to. And we hit some roadblocks. I think we hit some stumbling blocks, didn't we? Where it would get to the next session and you'd say, actually, last time was a little bit too deep. So for me, from my perspective, it felt like one step forward and then another step back, and progress was kind of intermittent, and then you could easily have a backslide. You'd go out and do a 100-meter walk instead of a 50-meter walk, and then you'd be on your back for a couple of days. So it was difficult to start with, wasn't it? To find the balance for me to assess what you were capable of and what was actually going to be detrimental, and what would benefit you.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think you're absolutely right when everyone is different. So when you've got somebody dealing with somebody with long COVID, I mean, for me personally, I had a lot of inflammation in my chest. So I found it at the beginning very difficult to lie on my front to have my back massaged because it was really painful. And it just felt kind of, I think when you've had something like long COVID, and particularly if it's been quite scary at times, there's probably some, there's some PTSD for some people there. And so if they go into a certain position, it means they can't breathe properly. That kind of throws them back to where they were. So, so I think if you'd come any earlier into the situation, maybe even 2 months earlier, I just wouldn't have been able to lie on my front. So I guess for a massage therapist, they'd have to get the person into a position where they, even if it's just sitting up, where they could actually massage them and help kind of just calm down the nervous system.
Yeah, we definitely had to play around with positions, and we had to go, a little bit face down and then on your side and then back face down again to get more work done. We use the sideline position quite effectively to get into the muscles of the lower back. And there's something that actually stuck with me that you said initially, which was, it feels like the front of my sacrum is itchy.
Yeah.
Just needs a good scratch. So I start to think, what have we got around there, anatomy-wise? What is there that could cause that? And one of the obvious things in terms of anatomy is the cauda equina, which is where the lumbar plexus exit the spinal cord. So you've got a lot of nerve roots that come into that place. And this is around the sort of time where one of the hypotheses as to what the problem was a very general kind of assessment of inflammation of the nervous system. And I think overall, we probably weren't too far off the mark. I remember that you were working with a rheumatologist around that time, and I think they were treating the condition along those lines with a big emphasis on any kind of approach to rehab was to calm down your nervous system essentially and get you into the parasympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system and away from the sympathetic side. What kind of things did you try other than massage therapy around that time that you found that helped? And what kind of things did you try that weren't so helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, for me, it was all, I didn't really know what I was dealing with at the time. And either did anyone else. As we said, it was really difficult. And so everyone was just kind of feeling around in the dark as to what would work. So I think initially I kind of just joined a few social media groups, Facebook groups, who obviously had the same kind of thing as me, and we were all again just trying to kind of learn from each other. So there were certain things that I did, like supplements. I took supplements, vitamin D, vitamin C. I took something called niacin, which is something that expands your capillaries. It's called flushing niacin, it's called, and it basically, you take it and then expands your capillaries, which is supposed to therefore help blood move through, I guess, quicker and give you more energy. Other things that I did was I went on a low histamine diet, and again, that was just people talking about maybe there's a link between low histamine, inflammation. If you can eat lower histamine foods, then possibly that can bring down the inflammation. And I went on that, and that massively helped me. So that was quite a game changer for me, going on a low histamine diet, actually.
How long did you maintain that for?
I'm still on it now.
Excellent. Okay, so you've given it a really good go in terms of seeing how the effects are long term.
Yeah, it's very dull, and all the really nice foods like avocado, tomatoes, bananas are things you shouldn't eat. So it seems very strange that you're not able to eat those things, but it's for me, it's really helped.
What kinds of foods fall into the low histamine category?
Yeah, so most fruits and vegetables, except aubergines, spinach, bananas, and tomatoes, are good to eat. You can also eat fresh meat, but it has to be really fresh. So it's low in histamine when it's fresh, but as it is stored in a fridge, it builds up in histamine. So it's best to try and eat meat when it's completely fresh, which is obviously difficult to do because you have to catch and eat it. So yeah, you just do the best you can, really, just eating it as soon as you bought it.
So a couple of the things that have helped that I've been aware of when I've been around to visit you, gut health was a big one, and that's something that we tried to get on top of fairly quickly. And you've sought other more highly qualified professionals in that area, but you've had a look at your gut microbiome. You've received reports back on your good bacteria and your bad bacteria and things like that. Can you tell us a bit about that and if you think it's been helpful?
Yeah, I mean, really helpful. I think probably everyone has this issue, don't they, with their gut? And mine is slightly more interesting because I've had quite a lot of bowel surgery in the past. And so it's meant that my bowel isn't, I guess, working as effectively as it can be. So therefore, it's really important for me to have good gut health. And they just helped me with just taking the right supplements for it and eating well. So I was trying to eat as close to fresh as possible so that I knew that I was getting the right nutrients into the body. And yeah, that definitely helped. It just helped calm my system down. I also, I think after about a year of doing all this kind of, trying all these different things and still not really knowing what I was doing, I then came across an amazing website called 360 Mind, Body, Soul, which is run by a fantastic lady called Susie Bolt, who's a yoga instructor. And she was somebody who is clearly very intelligent. She's very curious, and she had long COVID herself. So when she went through long COVID, she did lots and lots of research and set up a group for people, a positive group. So a group that would help people heal rather than dwelling on the difficult part of long COVID. And that was really encouraging because there was just so much information from looking at that website. So that's when I really, really understood the whole nervous system and the part it played in long COVID and the importance of settling the nervous system down so that you were telling your body, almost tricking your brain. So you were telling your body that it's safe, it's okay, you can do this stuff again, because it had been in fight or flight mode for so long that I think it had forgotten how to go into, as you say, the parasympathetic mode. It was just stuck in the sympathetic the whole time. And that's completely exhausting. So I found that was the kind of light bulb moment for me when I joined that group and I started doing yoga to calm the nervous system down, coupled with all the other things that we've talked about, and particularly with the massage from you, Liam, just because that really helped get me into that zone. So it set me off for the week, calmed me down, get the nervous system kind of relaxed.
I think it's important for the soft tissue therapist to realise that they're just playing a part in the grand scheme of healing, essentially. And I do wonder, there's a book I read a while ago called Total Recovery, and it goes into the person's long-term subjective history. So if they've come in with, an apparently random onset of a chronic illness, like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, or in this case, long COVID, it's almost just a case of there's something that's pushed them over the edge and it's pushed their nervous system into fight or flight. And for some reason, it's just the straw that broke the camel's back. And their nervous system's gotten to a point that just says, nope, that's it, we're shutting things down. So from that perspective, it does one thing in common, because there aren't many, between clients that I've seen and friends that I know that have had some kind of chronic illness and chronic fatigue, is that the problem does need to be addressed on all fronts. So I think what you've done is try every avenue, and actually they've probably all come together to help. I think one other thing that you've mentioned there that I've noticed from you and the way that you talk about it and the way that it's helped is that community of people that you've met through that Facebook group. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. And we could probably move on from there onto something a bit more like talking therapies, which I think are very important as well, because a lot of these things, we talk about the physical, but sometimes we forget about the emotional and how our nervous system perceives stress only in a few different ways. And, they all go down the same channels. So psychological stress does have a physical effect on the human body. Have you had any experience of that since your experience with long COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for the first 6 months, I was definitely under a lot of psychological stress because I didn't understand what was happening to me and I didn't understand why I wasn't getting better, and no one really understood it. So I think that was definitely worsening my symptoms, because my brain was telling me that everything was really not right. And so that was just exaggerating everything. So I think once we kind of understood the role of the nervous system in that, and the importance of trying to calm everything down, either by talking, and I did talk to a counsellor, maybe I had 3 or 4 sessions, mainly because I just felt like I was quite traumatized by the whole experience. And I found that really, really helpful, just to talk it through so I could let it go. I still feel like I probably got to let some more go, because it still feels very raw, even though I'm 2 years down the line. But I think it's really, really important to speak to somebody about it when you have something like long COVID or something equivalent, where you don't quite know when the end is going to be, the kind of uncertainty of that. Because once you do that, then you can start using your brain to kind of do things that are more positive and just get yourself calm again.
Well, that's one definition of stress, isn't it? Is the loss of control. And in many ways, you had the control taken away from you in terms of your physical ability over your day-to-day life. One other thing that I picked up on, and this is reading between the lines, but there was more of a burden put on your husband in terms of, things that you just physically couldn't do. So he was having to pick up and do. And I would imagine that can have a cascade of psychological effects, maybe some guilt from you. And this is just going to add to that psychological picture. So, we talk about nutrition, we talk about exercise, we talk about manual therapy, but definitely some kind of psychological aspect needs to be addressed in most cases. And it's beyond my remit to advise that, but you can definitely take the anecdotal experience of others and suggest that might be beneficial for the person.
Yeah, and I would say that, when I met you at sort of month 3 or month 4, I didn't start speaking to somebody probably until after a year. So you were kind of you were the person that I could happily speak to about it, because you don't want to put it on your friends, because, they're getting on with their lives, they're having fun, they're doing their jobs, they're looking after their kids. And I think it's really difficult for people to understand it who haven't been through anything like that. So it's a kind of lonely place, and so you need to have somebody who was just happy to listen. And a massage therapist is perfect for that, because they can't go anywhere. So it's great.
Yeah, it's one thing that I don't think you get too much training for when you're doing this, is that it all tends to come out on the couch. And there's something about that environment that gives the client the kind of opportunity and facilitates that sort of deep discussion. And they'll tell you things that they might not tell other people. And sometimes I think just listening is key. I was keen to try and offer up advice, but I think you just needed somebody to try to listen. And I've tried my best to listen, and I've tried to take it all in, and I've tried to paint a picture of what was going on and what we could do to help. And it did take a while before we could get to the stage where we're giving you different types of physical activity to do and different kinds of exercises. And I've only just recently come across a study, because it's only come out in the past few months. And what they found is that, looking at a decent sample size, I haven't got the number here in front of me, but what they recommend is starting with a low intensity aerobic activity, initially ranging between 30% and up to 55% of max heart rate. And this is obviously going to vary massively depending on the recovery of the individual and where they are when you meet them. Did you monitor any of these physiological variables, such as heart rate, blood pressure, anything like that in the early stages when you got back to exercise?
Yeah, and I think, from my experience, you just have to be so careful when you start exercise. So I'm surprised they're saying that much, to be honest, because when you're in the throes of long COVID, just walking up one flight of stairs is enough. So I took most of my guidance from Susie Bolt from 360, because by doing her yoga classes, it was you start off on kind of level 1, which was very, very low level movement. So a lot of it would be lying on the floor, just trying to kind of do small movements to just tone your muscles to keep them moving again. So with Susie Bolt's classes, we'd move up from sort of doing 2 glute bridges to maybe 10 glute bridges. And that's over a period of a month. So it's very, very slow, and there's no raising the heartbeat at all for that.
Was everybody in your group at the same level, or does she vary depending on the ability of the person?
No, so that's what was so clever about it, that Susie would always demonstrate level 1 and then say to people if they felt they could do more, but don't, if you don't feel you can, then maybe do 10 of these, but I'm going to stop now. So she always gave you permission to stop doing it when she stopped doing it. Whereas I think if she'd carried on doing 10, then you'd just think, oh, I better do 10 because I've got it, So it was quite clever the way she did that, because she gave people permission to just do it slowly. So I did, in answer to your question in a very long-winded way, I did get a watch which had, heart rate and all sorts of things on it, HRV and stuff. But I found that it made me slightly obsessed. So it wasn't very helpful, because I'd see that my heart rate was going up, which it did a lot, particularly in the first 18 months of long COVID, too quickly. And then I'd start to panic, and then your brain would send the wrong signals to the body. So I actually just tossed that aside and just thought, look, I'd rather just not know if my heart's going up, and just kind of get on with trying to recover. So for me, I would prefer to stay away from that.
Those types of devices can have that white coat syndrome as well, can't they? Where they make something happen just from being aware of it.
Yeah, totally.
I seem to remember as well, at one point you were on amitriptyline. You were prescribed that. Are you still taking that?
Yeah, so I'm still on 5 milligrams. I had that because because of this pain or the inflammation in my chest, and the pain was so bad by about 4 months that I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't do any. I felt I was just in so much pain all the time. I couldn't believe that it was possible to have that amount of pain for so long, and it was just the inflammation, which my brain was probably making worse. And so I went to see a rheumatologist who was brilliant, and he treated it, I guess, like he would somebody with something like fibromyalgia. And he said, okay, let's get you on amitriptyline, let's get the pain down. And once we get the pain down, then you can start to recover. And that, again, was a bit of a game changer for me, because I went from 4 months being a lot of pain to having much less pain and being able to move around again. So that was really, really helpful.
And that also had some really great benefits with your sleep as well, I think, didn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was good. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I haven't come off it. But I will eventually, one day.
Well, I mean, 5 milligrams is, in terms of dosage, that's almost non-existent, isn't it?
Yeah, it still helps though.
Yeah. And obviously sleep is a huge factor in overall recovery from injury, illness, and particularly a chronic condition like this.
Yeah, and that's again a difficult one. The rheumatologist kept saying to me that I must get 8 to 9 hours sleep a night. And as soon as someone says that to you, it makes you kind of obsessed with sleep and then not sleep so well. So I just had to kind of forget what he'd said and just go with how much sleep I could get. And it was always fine. As soon as you relax into it, it's easier, isn't it?
Can you tell us a bit more about this group that you've joined? Because I know that you've been on the receiving end of mentorship and advice, and you've now progressed to the point where you're mentoring others.
Yeah, so the group that Susie set up, they've probably got about, I think, something like 7,000 members so far. And it's a brilliant community because everyone's very encouraging, and there's a lot of experience in there now. And Susie has interviewed various experts in the field who've done a lot of research over the last 2 years. So there are many more answers now. Not all the answers. We still don't fully understand why people are still having long COVID for such a long period of time, whether there's viral debris still in the body or whether it's just inflammation because you're kind of stressed and it's not going down. It'll probably take a little while for them to get that, but this group particularly has just been wonderful because you've got people like me who've had it for 2 years now and coming out the other end, and you've got people from the Omicron wave who are sort of coming into it now 3 or 4 months into. It takes a while for you to realize you've got long COVID, right? Because you don't really know what this is, but there's more awareness now, and then they come into the group, and so we can then mentor the people who are new to it and help them, and I guess help them recover much quicker because we've now had the tools and we know what works.
I think that's probably playing a huge part in the recovery process for you as well. Being able to mentor someone almost brings you full circle in terms of recovery.
Yeah.
So in your journey to recovery, you recommended a book to me called Cured. which I ended up getting the audiobook for, and I've listened to it, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So the kind of synopsis of the book is a medical doctor who has some religious belief, and there's an element of the spiritual there as well, although it's not biased from any one perspective. And he begins to look at the case of spontaneous remission from terminal disease, and he tries to draw some kind of formula between these and any similarities or anything that he can bring about in terms of what contributed to the healing process. And I think what he finds overall, spoiler alert, is it's a combination of everything. So like we've discussed, and I think a lot of what's in that book can be applied to chronic fatigue and chronic illness. So he looks at the exercise, he looks at stress management, he looks at nutrition. But the common thread between all the different problems is that in many cases, just receiving that news of a terminal prognosis is a big shake-up in that person's life. So, immediately the things that don't matter get shaken right down to the bottom of the pack. And they start to really prioritize the important things with the view in most cases that life is too short for this, that, or the other stress. So stress management, I think, is key there. But he does look into the things that we just don't understand as well. And there are lots of things within the body, lots of processes, physiological processes, lots of emotional happenings we just don't understand. And I mean, in my time as a therapist, I definitely believe that there is a correlation between the psychological, emotional, physical, biological. We're all one organism, and you can't just separate it into the component parts. Everything needs to be working together. Have you got any thoughts on that? It was a fantastic recommendation. Thank you.
I mean, do you remember? I can't quite remember, but do you remember the story about the guy who was told he had cancer? Do you remember that one?
Mr. Right.
Yeah.
Is that the one? So I think the story goes, and you can Google this fairly easily. Mr. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. I'll put a link in the show notes. He had a type of cancer which basically meant that his lymph nodes were the size of oranges. So on his neck, his armpits, and his groin. He was given a new medicine that was on trial, and essentially the major contributing factor was that he believed it was going to work. So they gave it to him on the Friday, and by the Monday he was up and walking around and talking to the nurses and joking. The way that they wrote the effects of that medication were the tumours had melted like snowballs on a hot stove. The guy was discharged. He made a recovery. A couple of months down the line, he unfortunately read a news report that debunked this particular drug. I think it was called cribiacin. Interestingly, as soon as he found that out, the tumours came back. So this was in an age where doctors could kind of do what they wanted within reason. So he went back in. The doctor took into account the placebo effect, and he said to the guy, "Don't worry, we've got this second generation cribiacin that I can inject you with." He went out on a limb and he actually injected the guy with sterile water. Mr. Wright, believing that this was the new and improved version of the medication, again went into remission. The tumours once again mounted fairly drastically and quite quickly. And I wish I could tell you that was the end of the story and he lived happily ever after. Sadly, he had a relapse again a couple of months later after he once again found out through some means that it wasn't a real medication, and he sadly died. But this is one of those things that we just can't explain. I mean, the power of placebo and the power of the mind over the body is just all-encompassing. It's sensational that the mind can control things like that. But it seems to be like an unconscious ability of the mind, isn't it? You can't just consciously will this thing to happen, and it does.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's something that when you're ill, your mind plays an enormous part, because it's quite a depressing state to be in. You know, when you don't have any energy and you've got time to think, you're in your own thoughts, it's very easy to have negative thoughts. And so to try and turn that around and have, I say positive thoughts loosely, because it's not necessarily positive thoughts, but it's just kind of hope that everything's going to get better, can make an enormous difference. And I think certainly for me, I got to the point where I was realizing that when I was at home and just doing stuff around the house, I was kind of fine, and I could stand on my feet, for an hour at a time, and I could just move around. I could do stuff in the garden. I could make things, and I could do the tea for the kids. I was thinking, hey, I'm getting better. And then someone would ask me for a walk, to go out for a walk with them. And I'd meet them and think, even before I went to meet them, I'd think, oh gosh, what happens if they want to walk further than I can actually walk? And so I put that seed of doubt into my mind. I'd meet them, and then throughout the walk, I'd be half not enjoying it because I'd be worrying that I might relapse, and then I would relapse. So it's almost like I diarised the relapse because I was so worried. So at that point, I thought, okay, something's not right here, because my brain is bringing things up. The brain is causing stress, which is kind of bringing these symptoms on. So that's when I went and did something called the lightning process, which is it's a program where they teach you to try and turn self-limiting thoughts off and try and rewire your brain so that you're thinking more positively about something rather than. So I guess you're thinking more positively about recovery and what you can do rather than what you can't do. And the more you kind of send those signals to your brain, the more they get used to it, and the more likely they are to go to that automatically than straight back to the kind of self-limiting thoughts. So that for me was a real help. And there's lots of different programs out there like that. You don't have to spend the money on something like Lightning Process, but you can even get it off the internet or read the books. But I think there's a lot to be said about the rewiring of your brain and just working on that. It's the mental health, isn't it? But it's working on your brain as well as your body if you're struggling physically. Yeah, and it is a difficult one because everyone's different, aren't they? And so, for me, I knew I was at that point where my mind was actually bringing on some of the symptoms. But it was only up until that point where I felt that. If I'd done that before, it wasn't my mind at all. It was because I was really poorly and I physically couldn't do it. And I still have to pace even now. I wouldn't just go and climb up a mountain because I know that my body is deconditioned. So I'm not ready to do it as you would do if you'd been not done very much for 2 years. But I think the mind, it's just made me realize that you can massively change how you live and how you think of things when you concentrate on your thoughts and what you're thinking.
Yeah, there was a really good article actually by a colleague of mine called Jason Anderson. I'll share the link. I think it's fantastic. But he talks about the way that different things that enter your body can affect your state of mind and therefore your biological health. And he talks about things that you eat, drink, inhale, but also thoughts that you think and thoughts that you allow to make a home inside your brain. So when you started that lightning process, I remember you were actually, I'd say, healthily skeptical, and you were kind of giggling a bit because there were some funny things that they had you saying. What kind of things were they? The positive affirmations?
I was skeptical because I kept seeing people on who had long COVID saying that they did lightning process, and then suddenly they were cured. And I just thought, I can't do that. I just don't feel I can do that. So there was definitely doubt in my mind. But yeah, I think. Yeah, so basically they get you to, as soon as you have a self-limiting thought, they get you to stop, to kind of do a sign like stop. So you're literally saying to yourself, stop. So if I was, I don't know, going for a walk and I thought, right, I better not, as I was walking, I better not walk more than a mile. As soon as I have that thought as I'm walking, I'll just go stop and then try and think of something else that's kind of not a nice thing to think about rather than worrying about what I can't do. And I found the more I did that, I just stopped it as soon as I had those thoughts, then it would help me overcome my kind of doubt. And then I wouldn't be thinking about it. I just do it. It's about doing, isn't it? When you're just doing rather than worrying, your body just responds so much better. But it's effective. And I think I would definitely use it, even if I was, I don't know, having to do a talk to a group of people. If I had the anxiety before that talk about speaking in front of a group of people, I'd try and use it by, stop and just refocus my thoughts so that I wasn't concentrating on the negatives all the time. And I think probably in all areas of life, so many of us can learn from that because we all have self-limiting thoughts which stop us enjoying our lives.
Yeah, and thoughts become things. Yeah. And from the therapist perspective, that's really helpful to know, and it's something to keep in mind. And this is something that I've dealt with in sport often because you're dealing with players with injuries, and that psychological impact on the fact that they're not playing is huge, and it can play a very significant but unseen part in their recovery, and then ultimately getting them back to what they need to be doing. And it is very similar with the case of chronic fatigue or chronic illness, long COVID, and the type of language that you use as a therapist, the way you talk to the client, the kind of energy that you bring. I know that's something that, luckily, I was, from my experience of working in sport, it's something that I'm quite conscious of. So I do try to apply that to these situations as well. And so our subjective assessment when I first, our chat when I first get there for your treatment would always be, we'd focus on the objective things. So what have you been up to that week? What kinds of improvements have you made? How have you felt? But then that would be it. I'd try not to talk too much about it for the rest of that thing. We'd try to just focus on positive things. And it wasn't a case of ignoring. It was more a case of not dwelling on the negative.
Yeah.
So, and that can be applied to setting rehab and exercise as well, if you were going to do such a thing, if you're suitably qualified and experienced, and et cetera, we'd focus more on what you could do rather than what you couldn't do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's important to do that, because then you feel you've got slightly more control over your thoughts, because you are thinking about what you're thinking about, if that makes sense, which is helpful. One thing that Susie Bolt really encouraged us to do as well, and this is for anyone who has kind of a long-term illness, is to just always make sure you have moments of joy in your day. And that's difficult when you're lying in bed, day after day, week after week. It's really difficult to have moments of joy. And even if it's just looking out the window and just, listening to the birds, it's just trying to find something to have some joy in. And just that feeling of joy is good for you, for your soul, for your brain. It helps you. People have different ways of experiencing it, don't they? But it's to kind of have some gratitude, I guess.
Gratitude, you took the word right out of my mouth. That's something that people are practicing often these days, just for good mental health. It comes hand in hand with mindfulness and just trying to have the good energy, trying to have positive thoughts. People often will start the day with 5 things that they're grateful for.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good thing to do.
Just focusing on the positive, isn't it? Not dwelling on the negative.
Yeah.
So at this stage, would you consider yourself recovered?
That's a good question. I find that difficult to answer, because it's really difficult to know how deconditioned I am, and so therefore I can't compare myself before I got COVID to the person I am now. So I think I'm well on the way, is what I'd say. I knowing what I'm like, I would probably say I wasn't recovered until I was running a marathon again.
Do you think that there was a certain amount of acceptance required, that a full long-term recovery could be a very long way off, and just managing your expectations in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I suspect I won't go back to being the person I was before. I think all long COVID people have realized that the life they were living before was just, full on, and we weren't giving ourselves any time to just kind of relax. And I use the word heal, but what I really mean is just give ourselves time to just calm our nervous systems down, so that we're able to do as much as we need to do, but in a way that's, I guess, in a more healthy way, so that we're just not kind of running ourselves down all the time. And I guess that's probably what I was doing before. So I guess the answer to your question is, I have no idea how long it will take for me to get back to where I was before, but I will definitely give myself more time, whatever that is, even if it's just, sitting in the garden for 20 minutes and just enjoying the bird song, or it's going for a walk on my own. Just time out, just a bit of time out, I think is good for you to do that.
I mean, we're so switched on and connected in general, and so distracted. We've got so many things to keep us occupied, which is, the first time in history that we've been so stimulated in that sense. So, I mean, people are starting now to realize that we can't just live our lives at 100 miles an hour and expect to be fully functioning and able to maintain that pace of life long term.
Can I just mention something about being present as well?
Yeah.
I only say that because I think one thing I've really learned from the last 2 years is that before I got COVID, I was always planning and worrying and organizing and just living life on this kind of conveyor belt of things that I had to do. And I was very rarely actually just present in the moment. So even when I was sitting at the dinner table with the kids, I would be talking about, what we're going to do next, or, just constantly planning. Whereas now I just sit and listen, and I enjoy just sitting and listening and being there. And, it's great, isn't it, to just be sat at a table with your kids?
It is great, but I'm terrible for that as well. Sometimes I'll even be worried that the situation is going to end before it has finished. So kind of forfeiting some of the enjoyment of the present situation. What kind of ways have you found to do that, to be more present?
Yeah, I think just being present, it's just being in the moment, isn't it? So just looking, just studying someone's face and just listening to them and fully giving them your concentration. I guess that's being in the moment rather than looking at them, but having your own thoughts about what you're going to do later. So for me, it's just giving someone my time, but actually properly my time.
I think that's tough. And it's probably tough for the major reason that we're so easily distracted, myself included. We're always checking our phones. It's definitely takes some practice. I think there's a mindfulness exercise that I've found quite helpful. Just to, if I'm out for a walk, it's a way that I'll try and focus on my environment rather than want to check my phone or think about what I'm doing later. And it's to focus on 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I like that because you can start to pick out the different colours in the trees and the different cloud formations and the animals that you might be able to see. And yeah, sometimes you've got to be quite intentional about being relaxed and present. Ironic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to do it sometimes, particularly when you have got a lot going on in your mind. But if you can make yourself do it, you just feel so much better.
I always think of a story. I think it was Edward Norton, the actor, and he said that he tried to do sort of meditation. He tried different types of mindfulness, and he just really couldn't switch his brain off. So the one thing that he did to essentially meditate was he learned to fly a plane. And the reason is that for takeoff and landing, it takes 100% of your mental focus not to crash and die. And so for those periods of time, he physically couldn't focus on the stresses of life and family and whatever else. And that was his way of doing things. And I think I relate a bit more to that. I think rather than emptying my mind, giving it a task to focus on.
Yeah, even playing the piano. I mean, you're a drummer, you can play the drums, but just that concentration, being in the moment, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, and music's such a great one because you have to be present because it literally exists over a time span. So if you take your eye off the ball for 1 minute, you stop it. And drumming's great because, I mean, first of all, you get to hit things hard. And secondly, you've got all 4 limbs doing something completely different. Just find your mindfulness, find your task, find something that you enjoy that takes you out of the situation. I think it's great advice.
Distraction as well.
Distraction, but not of the digital variety.
No, not of the digital, definitely not.
So we've looked at recovery from every angle so far, from the physical, so exercise, nutrition, and we've looked at the psychological, so stress management. We've looked at the anti-inflammatory side of things, so how to calm the nervous system down and get it into the parasympathetic. Something that comes up often in these 2 books that I've recommended, which are very medically minded books, Total Recovery and Cured, is the spiritual aspect, which is it's the intangible. It's something that we can't actually get our hands on, but it's definitely significant. And something that they've noticed is that there tends to be a spiritual element. Not to say that it's a prerequisite; we absolutely need one, but that's played a part in the long-term recovery of these chronic illnesses. What's your experience of that, Jo, or have you got any?
Yeah, I mean, definitely at times I would want to just shout at God, why on earth is this happening to me? But actually, when I thought about it more, I felt like, why shouldn't it happen to me? Because things happen to people, all the time. Why not me? And I also got a great sense of strength and peace knowing that people were praying for me. So people in the church family were praying for me. And that was amazing, just knowing that that was taking place while I was in this really, really difficult journey where I couldn't necessarily feel that connection myself.
So what's next for you, Jo, in terms of continued prolonged recovery?
I want to think more about my job because I've been doing HR for a long time. So I want to do something completely different. And I guess having mentored people with long COVID, that's given me an idea that I may do something more in that line. and I want to climb a mountain again. So I want to climb a mountain called Kader Idris, which I climbed with my dad about 5 years ago, and it's the most beautiful mountain. It's tough, it's really amazing, but I have this wonderful group of mums who I walk with, and I haven't been able to walk with them really properly in the last 2 years. So that's my aim, is to climb Kader Idris with the mums.
Where is the mountain?
It's in Wales.
To be honest, I think that some kind of counselling, some kind of talking therapy for you to go into and to play the part of the therapist would be an obvious move, because for one, you've been through it. You've exhausted every option. You've looked thoroughly into every mode of recovery, but also just your whole kind of attitude throughout. You've always been positive. In front of me, at least. I'm sure you've had your down moments and your dark days.
Moments along the way, definitely.
But you've always put on that brave face with me, which I've had to try and sort of shake you out of sometimes, but it's just your nature, I think. It's just how you are. But that would have helped things long term, just you being so positive, so smiley, putting on that front. But I genuinely believe that you have that positive mindset as well. You're not just putting on the front. That's, you expected to get better, and you wanted to do that in a positive way. Yeah. And my husband deserves a medal as well, by the way. Jeff's been a star. Yeah. It's not easy for the husband. But he's a great cook now. Yeah, he was a great cook when I wasn't able to cook. He seems to have forgotten his cooking now. So I need to have a few dips, don't I, just to get it back in the kitchen again. So what kind of advice would you give to soft tissue therapists that might be working with somebody that's suffering with long COVID? Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think the main thing is just to recognise that they've probably been through and really going through a very difficult time. So to listen with no judgment, because unless you've had something like long COVID, it is really difficult to understand what someone's going through, both physically and mentally. So just listen to them and just allow them to talk to you about it. And then I think in terms of the actual massage, I mean, you found this definitely, Liam, was that because so often you have quite a lot of inflammation, just very, very, very gentle to begin with, and just getting into positions where the individual feels comfortable. And just tell them that, to be honest, if they're in a position that really isn't comfortable and is really stressing them out, just to say, can we move into a different position? Because that can cause quite a lot of stress. With long COVID, anything seems to cause stress. It's like your nervous system is heightened to anything that could, I guess, cause any pain or give you fear. So, just trying to work with them to get them comfortable. So I think one thing that's really helpful for a long hauler is to go and see a soft tissue therapist, because A, it helps you calm your nervous system down, and B, it reduces your inflammation, and it gets you straight into the parasympathetic. So it's really, really important. And I think if I could put my 2 cents in there for advice that I give to other soft tissue therapists, just from having worked with you and others with other chronic illnesses, is be confident in your training. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in that particular illness to be effective as a therapist. To be honest, don't blag it. If you don't know what's going on, then don't claim to. And as Joe said, just listen to the person. Try to understand. Don't listen to wait to talk, but listen to understand. I think that's key. And if you can just connect with the person on that personal level, and give them someone to talk to, somebody to understand, then you're halfway there with something like this. As far as treatments goes, it's always going to be very general. And as Joe said, very, very light. We don't want to put any more stress on the nervous system because it's already under a vast amount of stress. That's why it's acting the way it is. But just very light, lots of fascial work, connective tissue work, superficial stuff. Just try and get that nervous system into the parasympathetic. Have you got any advice for people that might be suffering with long COVID? Yeah, I think the number one thing is to just realise that you're not alone. There's plenty of other people who have been through
this, and 2 years down the line there's a lot more knowledge and understanding about it now. I think if I was to speak to myself again, 2 years ago, I think there's 3 things I would say. The first one is to educate yourself. So personally speaking, I go to 360 Mind, Body and Soul Facebook page because there's lots of information on there. There's articles, there's interviews. You can tap into other long haulers and ask questions. And you can get advice on how to recover, things like breath work, yoga nidra, nutrition, pacing, all the things that calm down the autonomic nervous system that are really important. And then secondly, I think I would seek help. So don't be embarrassed to seek help. It's difficult sometimes, isn't it? We all have a lot of pride, but people are really willing to help. And when you first are in the sort of throes of long COVID, you can feel pretty rubbish and you need to have a lot of rest. So help with kids, meals, washing, anything you can do to get help, just accept it. And also just accept that the house can be a mess. It's fine. Just go with it. Don't get stressed about that. And then get your rest, get the rest you need, and then just gradually try to gently move and build up your stamina through pacing. And then finally, I think talking therapy is really important. It's a lonely place and it's difficult. It's difficult for others to understand who haven't been there. And so I'd say find someone to talk to who isn't your partner, because they honestly get quite bored of hearing you talk about it, I think. So it's good to find someone else. Whether it's through your GP or privately, just find a counsellor to talk to, just to process what's happened and what's going on at the moment and how you move forward. And I think really the most important thing to remember is that nothing is permanent. You will recover. Lots of people have recovered. So just keep that close to your heart, that you will recover, and just go with all the education and everything else you need to do to get there.
So my usual question at this stage would be, where can people go to find out more? But you've given us so many useful resources, books, names of people. I think what we'll do is just include those in the show notes with the links if possible, so people can go and find out more about those if they want. So Jo, thank you so much for being such a positive ray of light throughout your fairly miserable time and your long journey. And for coming and talking to us. It's been really interesting and hopefully helpful to lots of other therapists out there.
Thank you, Liam. It's been an absolute pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Soft Tissue Therapy Podcast. Subscribing, reviewing and sharing this podcast is a zero-cost way to support us and will allow us to keep on producing valuable content. You can follow us on social media and get in touch with questions, comments and feedback using the details in the show notes below. We also have a Patreon that will allow you to support the podcast at any level you choose, should you wish to do so. Details for this can also be found below. Thanks for listening.